Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
Mm,
Hi, Tariq. Hi, Jeremy.
Hello.
Hi, Imran.
How's it going, guys?
Going well. What about you?
Good, good. So, Tariq, the document that we shared, we'll go through the recommendations, right? There are certain recommendations I've seen around, around disaster recovery and stuff like that. So we can both cover those points.
Yes.
Perfect. So Jeremy, is Tim joining?
He should be.
Cool.
Yeah. Teams is some issues there now. So.
Hi, Tim. Can you hear us?
I can. How are you?
Hey, all good. All good. How are you?
Not too bad.
Cool, cool, perfect. So we have Tariq and Jeremy here. Tim, anybody else joining from your side?
This is it for now.
Ah, perfect. Okay, good, 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 good. So, yeah, let's quickly start. So I'll try and share my screen, and we'll bring up the document. And also, Tim, just wanna apologize for some of the scheduling issues we've had over the past couple of weeks, but finally we're here. So let's have a discussion.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, we've had so many pressing decisions to make, as you might imagine. So that's really what it all boils down to. And we want to make sure that the report, we actually, get the recommendations and all that sort of stuff in a form that's, usable for us and all that sort of fun stuff. So, we'll work through that and we'll give you our feedback on regards to the document and kind of go from there.
Perfect. Sounds good. So, so how do we structure this call then? So do you wanna quickly give us a feedback first from what you've seen, or should we discuss the recommendations that we have in the last section of the document? Go through the points. How do you want to do this?
Well, I'm not sure typically how you go about the process. I want to ensure that we cover your feedback, and then I can certainly give you my feedback in relation to recommendations. The recommendations from my perspective should be purely from your point of view. Yes, it has some context from us, but we want to make sure that okay, this is what you need to do to resolve these issues, blah, blah, blah. It needs to be kind of very specific and organized in the final docs so that there's no question on what we believe, you guys believe we should be doing to resolve the issues that you see. But I think we go through the document like you typically would. We'll ask questions along the way, and in the end, we'll kind of detail the action or whatever.
Sure. I think sequence-wise, obviously, a couple of things happened out of sequence, but generally, we would have had this session that we're having now before submitting this report, kind of just go through the points, have a discussion between us, have initial thoughts from you as well, and then we put that all together in the document. But it's fine. I think we needed we couldn't arrange the session earlier, and then you wanted to see the report, but that's fine. We went through that cycle, but we can go through these points now, and then again, we can then incorporate the feedback as well. So it's just slightly sequence change, but it still should be okay. Yep.
Great. Perfect.
Cool. So in that sense, okay, so let's talk about, we'll talk about generation one. I think some of these, again, when we were going through the sessions, the discovery sessions, we were discussing things, we were looking at and observing things. So we were taking notes. So it's all about, what we've observed and then what we think we should do going forward as well. So really these points are based on that. What we have, again, from starting from generation one, is again, this is something we saw earlier in the during the demo, that I think the transport needs to be secure. We did find that there was HTTPS and certificates had some issues in the setup, so that's again something that needs to be sorted. Coming to the SMTP relay, I think we've discussed that this is a ongoing issue, and we want that to be sorted and replaced, ideally by a service provider like SendGrid or Office 365. And Tariq, do you want to mention quickly about this, the IP whitelisting element?
Yes. Regard to the IP whitelisting, I would recommend we can go with the Office 365 SMTP relay. It will take care of everything on the Office 365 side. We just need to relay from our side to Office 365 with the receive connector on Office 365 portal.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just keep going through the list. Feel free to let us know if you have any points in there. So DNS provider downtime issues. Yeah, I think this is again something you mentioned, Tim, that you've had some challenges, and we talked about this, that we should look for replacing the DNS with one of the well-known ones where again the uptime is quite high.
So for this one, I would expect the that we would, in the final recommendation, say this is how you would do it. Because I don't want any, all of these, the how is important, right? So we go switch to these and, figure out how to do that, but I need to know there's not going to be, much downtime and all that sort of good stuff. So if you recommend a specific secondary DNS and, how we set that up, I think that would be critical. We understand, obviously migrating to a well-known DNS. Is your feedback that if we migrate to like a Azure or something similar, that they would already have the redundant DNS? Is that what you're thinking?
That's correct. Yes.
I
So
would
you said
recommend
that-
you guys. I would recommend you guys. We can migrate. We can just import the DNS zone from your current service provider to either GoDaddy network solution. What we decide, and when everything is imported there, we just need to change the naming servers. It will be working fine because the DNS IPs entities are not going to change. Only the naming servers are going to change. It will not uh, go for any cause of downtime.
Do you recommend two providers? Like as an example, we would have a main provider and then a secondary provider, or are you saying it's common and sufficient to have one main provider that actually handles both the standard name server and the secondary?
I would recommend to go with a single one, either with the GoDaddy or either with the network solution.
Currently, we use the registrar, registry.com, and they use, obviously, they were purchased by, I think, Network Solutions, and they've had numerous issues. So, Jeremy, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I want to get away from register.com and better. And
And their recommendations, then, in your eyes, is correct, is good because you won't offer
Yep.
them anyway.
correct.
And Jeremy, is it sufficient to say you'd rather go with a major provider that we can handle it all as one service versus using multiple?
Yes.
All right. Good. Next.
Yeah.
That's good. So I'm making sure I'm not on mute. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is the database redundancy. So the app database is not fully redundant due to the split of core database servers. All customer database should have a replica set up for redundancy. Database must be deployed under always, and always on feature. Activity. So I think a couple of things here, and then Tariq, please, feel free to jump in. I think a couple of things again we found during the sessions was that since your your customers are split between the databases, so your DR wasn't actually fully. It's not a full DR. In case one of them goes down, you still need to do move into the other server. So I think that migration activity needs to take place where all of your customer databases are redundant. So that was the point that we've captured here. So obviously there's an exercise that needs to happen. So Tariq, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, regard to the databases, we need to check their current databases, database servers. Like after 2012, we can go for the always on clustering, but there is a limitation with the standard and enterprise edition. Like with the standard edition, we can only replicate 2 databases. With the enterprise, we can do unlimited. This will provide us a flexibility, like we don't need to take care any kind of the servers. It will verify the everything is going to a single URL, and under the URL there are multiple servers. They are running as active mode.
Okay.
And the
So-
second thing, and the thing is, which we need to check right now, which type of clustering you guys are using. It's a storage level clustering, it's instance based, or what it is. We need to check this.
Yeah, right now it's a whole image-based replication. It's not even at the database level. For the DR currently set up, they replicate the whole VM.
Okay, got it. Got it. In this case, we don't need to go for these type of things because the DNS is resolving via the URL, and URL is pointing to the listeners. Under the listeners, your all databases are resides.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me
Okay.
just think about this one real quick. So there's the replication side, and then there's the data redundancy side. Are we thinking we would basically all customers would be on a single server, replicated to the second server or the DR? Or are we thinking so that this way there's actually truly redundancy at the main infrastructure level? Are we thinking take the 2 DB servers and just replicate them for DR? What's your thoughts on the actual pure? Because you're saying active-active, that suggests that DB01 and DB02 are kind of synced together for production reasons, right?
Okay. In this model and the always on, we configure the listeners, and these listeners are like on the back end. There are the 3 database servers. They are pointed to the listener, and the listeners have the running on the cluster level of the Windows, and it's probing the health and with the health of its which is active, and but on the transaction level commits and all this thing, it's going same time on all the servers. It's like there's no data losses if the traffic is switching from one server to another.
Jeremy, are you confident in implementing something like that to solve our redundancy, and then of course secondarily the DR side?
With the G1, it's kind of, it depends how fast that degrades. And by the time we get it in place, there might be no customers left. So,
Well, you got to assume it's going to be November 2021, right?
yeah. So I mean, for G2, it's a yes, absolutely.
Well, G2 we already handle it like that, I believe, except for the active West, right, which we've got to
Correct.
do. But this is G1. So in G1, the whole intent was we would consolidate down to DB01 and then just use drive redundancy and all that sort of stuff. Is that going to be sufficient? I think probably, right?
Yeah, most likely.
So would we be negating the database redundancy requirement then in switching that to disaster and accepting the risk?
Yeah, if we're staying in the well, we're locked in for a year now anyway. So yeah, I would say yes, because the data center would be responsible for the kickover if that server fails for more than 2 hours. So.
And then, yeah, so guys, this has just changed a little bit because we had to make decisions around this G1 architecture last week, as per you probably noticed with the notes going back and forth. Some of this we're actually going to be not end of lifing, but basically ceasing support after next November for this whole platform. And between now and then, all customers will be migrated from Gen 1 to Gen 2. So while all of this is critical and redundancy is critical to have in place, you know, we'll have to defer to that side of it to see what we are or what we aren't willing to accept risk-wise. But at any rate, this is obviously important feedback. On the DR, let me just read this real quick again. So on the disaster, Jeremy, then let me understand this one. On this one, from your perspective, the site recovery management without human intervention, basically you're going to probably state the same, right? It's going to be up to Thrive to resolve that.
Correct.
And there's we're not going to implement anything at this point just because we had to make that decision.
Correct.
Okay. So good feedback, obviously important feedback, depending on the timing that could, you know, we'll take some of this insight and work towards it, but you know, it may be somewhat negated due to the decisions that have to be made, right?
Sure. So did I get this right, Tim, that by next November, this is 2021 November, you would have migrated all the customers, or are you saying one of the SQL Server customers?
No. So we're gonna, starting now, any remaining customer that sits on those boxes that are in the SaaS world, they're going to be migrated to Gen 2, the new platform. So by next November is to have, we won't have a software as a service. We won't have this infrastructure. But I'll put this in perspective. It still has to meet the requirements of our business for compliance, regardless. Some risks we accept because we have an acceptable, procedural administration or other control in place. That means we'll be able to recover in the event of a disaster or something like that, for Gen 1. So we have to just make sure that we have the right mitigating controls in place based on your feedback as well to ensure that we're never out of compliance. And Jeremy, I'm assuming that's what you're thinking with the Thrive stuff, right?
Correct. And this will help me push them to make sure we're doing it right as well. And also, I have a plan B in case we have one or two clients that remain afterwards, where we move them to Azure. And this is the stuff I'd have to know what to put into place if we move them to Azure, if it came to that as a backup plan. So
Gotcha.
so this information is very valuable for that.
Yep. All right. All right. So we can.
Okay. So this was more about the DR still continuing, right? Failover. So Tariq, do you want to quickly see what we have here? Controller. Okay. So
Yeah. Regard to this, we suggesting because as per my understanding, the current provider is going to end of this year, but I come to know it's going to end on the next year. So this is our suggestion, to take as it is, lift and shift all the environment from their client service provider to Azure, and where we can set the SRM, site recovery management. And with this SRM, we enable the failovers and all the stuff like traffic. With the traffic manager, we can control the applications layer and access layer.
Okay. And I think because of these controls, this will fall into the same, because we've actually switched to, I think it's VDONG, and we do a bunch of different virtualized. So we've already, removing the load balancer, the two load balancers during cutover. So they won't be physical hardware anymore, and they'll be up to date with that specific infrastructure. But Jeremy, you'll want to make sure that, obviously that's what we're doing this week. There's no issues there, from that perspective, so that, we don't have any decrease or issues there from an app and a performance and from a load balancing perspective.
Correct. And also, we're going forward the next 90 days when we start the consolidation process as well.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So you guys are deploying the two load balancer, and I believe this will be GSLV with the GTM, right?
Similar, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we kind of anticipated this feedback. I mean, obviously, if you had gone to Azure with that infrastructure, we would have done the traffic manager route. But with it being, we had to weigh the cost of us versus our, prior provider, handling the migrations and dealing with that stuff just from a pure time perspective. And, we didn't have time to take on some of the risks or the manpower, but we still have a lot of options of, what we ultimately end up doing. But for the time being, we've had to make that decision. So that's done. We're definitely virtualized. We got, that configured basically to your feedback at this point. So we're good there. We should be.
Okay.
Now, on your Let me just read the second. And I know that, obviously in terms of your recommendation to move Gen 1 over to Azure, we had thought the same, and we actually believe, and Jeremy said, if I misstate anything, just correct me, but we believe that Azure would have been a better cost alternative and would have certainly optimized from the pure spend. But with the risks and the time and the personnel side, we're going to be part of the Thrive cloud, which, as you guys are aware, our original provider, Tier 1 Net, was bought by Thrive. And so we're going to stay in their cloud at least through that November with a depreciating cost model from January through November. It'll reduce cost and usage over time. But with that said, obviously having, incorporating your feedback into that as much as possible, to ensure that the environment does, work for the full needs and compliance is going to be critical. So I think, that feedback is obviously critical, but, pretty much where we had to move forward with that model as we sit. So that's your G1 feedback, correct, gentlemen?
That's correct, yes.
And if you scroll back up to the top, so I just want to do a quick, recap, if you will. So obviously HTTPS has to be working correctly. Jeremy, any issues with that aspect of it? I think do you need any hows or what to do?
I just need kind of guidance on how to set it up in O365. That's about it.
So for items 1 and 2, when we do the final, we need the how. How do we set it up?
Yeah.
From you guys' perspective, so that the recommendation is tied to something that you or we can do, and make sure it's all set up and configured correctly. Likely we obviously want to make sure we use your expertise from that perspective, but HTTPS is critical. SMTP relay, mail relay is critical. Jeremy, I'm assuming you would move to Office 365, not SendGrid to Gen 1?
Correct.
So if you guys, when you, from a final perspective, base your recommendation on Office 365, that would be critical. You can remove SendGrid.
Sure.
Mitigate IP whitelisting demarcation from the SFTP servers. Same thing. Jeremy, do you need anything there? Is it applicable?
No, I already got that information.
Okay, well, we leave it in the report. I would, obviously it's critical that DNS provider downtime. So this one I want the how. I mean, what would you guys do? Okay, let's move to Azure, and let's, keeping in mind that we're an Azure shop, Microsoft shop. Move to Azure. We do also have GoDaddy, but what's going to be the best solution for, redundant name, DNS and secondary? So we'll have 4 name servers, 2 standard or default, and 2 primary and secondary set up. Your recommendations for how to accomplish that would be critical. That one is a must on both G1 and G2, really across the company, as we know. Database redundancy, this feedback can pretty much, if you have any recommendations on how you would, accomplish it, or things to look out for, that would be great. At a high level, though, these 2 are less critical, but still important that, our team ensures that we're following the recommendation. So any specifics you can put from a recommendation would be important. Like if you have how, like when we talk about the listeners or anything like that, I would try to add some of that in here to make sure that it's, super clear. Look, this is what you need to be doing from a recommendation. Drawings obviously are great. That all makes sense. I get that. And then if we scroll down back to the last couple of pieces here, so we got traffic manager. That's done. I mean, that makes sense. And then the Azure. So really, I mean, from the one other thing I'd like to see on Gen 2 is, Jeremy, do you want to see anything current versus future state, like infrastructure diagram wise, how they might, perform that action so you get a gut check on how you would consolidate, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely like to see suggestions on the consolidation part. I mean, I've kind of already tested, well, some of the stuff, but I definitely would like to look at that because there's a lot of stuff out there and our cost is starting to go way up. Really, it's almost doubled in the last 3 weeks. So,
This is for Gen 1? Gen 1?
oh no, Gen 2, I'm sorry. But for Gen 1, yes, still the same thing. I'd still like to see how I would mimic this in an Azure environment and how to look for other possible ways to consolidate some of the services that are being done.
Yeah, so when we did the Gen 1, we had talked about, we had these 2 DB servers and you guys got a little bit of utilization, et cetera. But I'm curious, if you guys had to start from ground zero, how would you build that? And we have some diagrams here and all that sort of good stuff. These diagrams up above, are they taking into account that at that level? Are
Yes,
you?
this is the whole deployment. This is a deployment for one of our client we configured for that. They are using more than 4 database servers. They are data of 64 terabyte, which is replicated from one region to another region. And they are working on always on. We shifted to always on from storage level cluster.
Gotcha. I would want to see, you with the diagrams we sent, a rough in your mind, hey, you guys can consolidate this down and reduce that footprint of Gen 1 just to see, gut check wise how you guys would do that, in particular with your expertise and experience on Gen 1. It doesn't have to be the most, perfect footprint or infrastructure drawing, but we want to make sure that, because when you guys are looking at that and you see usage and it's not really critically, it's not being overtaxed or used, how would you reduce it down? What does that look like? What steps can we take? Because all of that leads to cost or optimization from that perspective. And I would put any notes there in regards to performance, because if you have performance notes, we're not coding, so it's not like we can take advantage of just scaling up all the time and make that infrastructure perform. It's never going to perform, and it's obviously being decommissioned over time on purpose because we have a new technology. But I think just getting a little bit of insight there would be pretty good. So for Gen 1, I don't think there's too much else other than the last topic. Besides HTTPS, there isn't a lot in relation to security in this. In your eyes, was, from a security perspective, are there any security level details besides HTTPS that you guys think are critical to, ensuring this Gen 1 platform, at least from now through November?
In this case, we need to check some sort of vulnerability testing and penetration testing to check, because as of now we don't have any inside of your apps. Like there's with the SQL injection and these type of thing which we need to check.
We can send vulnerability in pen test reports that we have. I thought we did that already.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I was
Okay.
curious at a glance if, when you guys look at those pen tests and those vuln tests, other ways to mitigate it besides us coding in the app, because I'm gonna refrain from doing any upgrades or any code changes, development on that platform. So if you look at those pen tests and just note anything security wide, I think that would be The only other detail I would probably consider, and those would probably be the 5 main details or 6 details that are critical, because outside of that, I don't know, what other glaring issues besides cost and things like that, Gen 1 presents that we can control. Because we're not going to be able to control the middleware and the Appian and all those details. So I think that's, anything else from your perspective, Jeremy, from a Gen 1 perspective?
No, that pretty much covers Gen 1 for me.
And you don't think, from logging, none of that stuff's an issue from your perspective? You think everything, you're good with this feedback with the final details once they provide them?
Yeah, because I got the Microsoft login already pulling everything over. So
Okay. All right. So I think that, should cover Gen 1.
Can I just mention, Tim, again on point 4 here, the reduced footprint of Gen 1. I mean, maybe I'm just thinking out loud. It may be as simple as trying, like on this, we looked on the server that the memory and the CPU usage was low. So it may be as simple as trying one SKU level down the server and see how that results in the performance. Now we don't know about your provider what kind of sizes or SKUs they offer, because obviously we know what Azure and AWS and these guys offer.
Sure.
But in terms of your provider, what are the next level of SKUs, and really it's a matter of, and as you go along from January to November, you're going to move customers out continuously, I believe. Then in that case, again, in theory, the server sizes need to go down in a linear fashion as well.
Well, and my point there was, like, without moving to Azure, without worrying about different services and AWS and all this stuff, if you had that, infrastructure, there are obviously tons of efficiencies we can gain just by consolidating that existing infrastructure. I think that's what I'm most curious of, because we can always model the new stuff after your recommendations from that perspective. Because the other alternative would be, what does this look like in Azure? And that's a much more major set of feedback. We need to go through that because we're not going to be moving to Azure at this moment. So I think if you can just think about that in the final recommendations, maybe include some notes there, that would be good. Just to make, kind of hit the goal. But I don't think it's going to be earth shattering. I don't think we have to put tons of effort into it. Because I think during the sessions and the stuff we called out previously, it should be sufficient. And Jeremy, unless I'm missing something, I think pretty much that would cover it, right?
yeah, that is correct.
And
Okay.
All right, cool. Now, obviously on Gen 2, we're going to be right back to the whole DNS side of it will be there, but I'm sure you have tons of feedback there. So let's start. Do we want to start covering this one?
Sure. So we'll start on Gen 2. So the first thing we, again, when we looked at it, I think the WAF, the web application firewall, which you do have a firewall in your Gen 1 infrastructure design. We currently don't have that in the Azure world, which again gives you that layer of security for inbound requests. So that is something that's the first point here.
Yeah, this is something I've been looking into for a while. It's just I don't, looking at this kind of diagram kind of puts together what I've been thinking, and just kind of puts it in perspective. But it's the how we get there, and how and what changes in the app are going to have to be made for testing it, because that's why I run into problems. Is I try to test some of these pieces and the application just blows up because it can't communicate to something. So that's where I need suggestions on how to make sure it's all under one, one unit. Everything's talking to each other across the same services and not going across user groups or stuff like that. It's still staying within the same virtual network and all that good stuff. And all the stuff is coming from the web browser, the user to web browser as well. So it might be a code change where we're not referencing having the user ping a storage device directly. It has to go through an application gateway or whatever. So there's some challenges there, but this is where I definitely would need the expertise to help me get through this with the plan and test it and how to get it implemented.
Yeah, sure. I mean, see, at the moment, because when we looked at your PaaS services, including the storage accounts, including the websites, all the PaaS services are kind of they have their own public endpoints that they're exposed to the public endpoints, whereas they should all be limited to just the callers, who is the intended caller that can call the web app, and then who can call the under the web app, and that can all be. It kind of starts with having a WAF layer at the top, which then is the only exposed to the public endpoint, service, and then everything else kind of is controlled tightly under it. So the WAF layer then redirects the requests to the app, and then the web app can then talk down to the SQL Server and can talk down to other services. But this is all nicely controlled. Very similar to the way traffic flows in your Gen 1. A request comes into the infrastructure from only one tunnel, and it's not allowed from any other space. And I think that whole thing needs to be set up here on Azure in your app. And then the way you do that is through, again, services. So each of these PaaS services, in the past, if you look at, I believe, 5 years ago or maybe 4 years ago, these security tightening services were not available in Azure, but they have subsequently then offered them. They used to be part of a more expensive offerings like app service environments. But now the good thing is it's a good time to be in where normal PaaS services offer those extra security features. So what that really means is that each of these, we have a VNet, we have subnets within that VNet, and then we do something called VNet integration between from these PaaS services. So what VNet integration means is that we say, I'm just going to take an example. The example is that web app A is now, we enable VNet integration with web app A. What that means is that web app can talk to services through that VNet. And then the other services, which it needs to call, we allow traffic only from specific VNet and subnets. So that really tightens it. So we say that this app can talk to a VNet, and then we say the app that needs to be called, which is like like a service app, can only be called from that subnet. And that way we kind of control where the traffic comes from. Anywhere else, if the traffic comes, it will deny. It will simply deny the request. So so that kind of prevents you from the whole heap of security. Again, denial, DDoS attacks and other attacks, and unwanted requests coming into your PaaS services. Because again, by default, it's a public endpoint, and anybody having that endpoint can start or can communicate with it, even though they may not be able to get in, but they can do they can try to do other things with it.
Yeah, like I actually got a couple alerts yesterday because Azure was doing their own pen test, and I saw an alert that somebody was trying to hit a bunch of those public endpoints yesterday with fake users.
The level of risk is in you guys' mind high?
Yes, I would say yes.
And so in the report, we'll want to make sure, Jeremy, all the house, do you want all that?
Yes. And
Yeah,
how the
so-
VPN would be tied into this for internal access. as
Be
well.
really, this one I'd want to be specific. The diagram obviously is critical. I love it. That's going to be key, but yeah, this is a very important one. And then we may want to just put some detail around the whys, like when you say, all right, look, it's going to deny this and you're doing this for DDoS or blah, 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 all those security things. I would want some notation around that just to be clear, because it is a pretty big security risk. And on top of it, all the hows of how to do it. You don't have to say how you would go set it up and configure it. I just want to know a little more detail around, you know, what is being set up. And you can be techie. You don't have to be. You don't have to put it in layman's terms. In other words, just so you know, we have a pretty good sense of what that looks like. But that's great. Great feedback.
Yeah, and the second thing, which is regard to the VPN, we must go with the MFA based VPN. Like we use the Azure Active Directory for authentication, then we enable the MFA for everyone, so they can access secure the any kind of leakage of password and all the stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, basically be able to control everything through AD rules, correct?
And that is, let me just think. That's number one item. Or where the feedback?
Here.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
Tom.
yeah. We just want to make sure that's all tied together nicely so that it's, you know. But I get it. Yep, that makes sense. And then, so that's all the bullets for above. That's a pretty big, from a criticality perspective. That whole top is, you know, obviously pretty critical. Okay. Yep, I got
Yeah,
it.
this. I mean, so this whole point is yeah, what we've kind of covered that.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. I just reading it and then it's cool. I got you.
And then Tariq mentioned about the VPN, and I think MFA, you know, as you can imagine, pretty much I think majority of the services I use today, you know, are VPN enabled. You know, even things like, you know, even Amazon.co.uk and whatever, we you know, everybody have tons of accounts now. Everybody's enabling MFA, and we understand the, you know, the reasons why. So I think it's something absolutely.
So for us, it's obviously admin side, but I would want to, Jeremy, up the ante and do it for everybody. Point
Yeah,
blank.
well, yeah, right now the only reason why we don't force it on everybody is because of the
That side?
Outlook actually.
Oh,
I turn it
gotcha.
on, people can't log into Outlook.
So what do
The
we do
Outlook
about that?
desktop app, they haven't upgraded the Outlook desktop app to accept MFA from Microsoft yet.
Okay. So guys, do you know any way around that or to solve that or?
Yeah, well, I do. Telling people to stop using the desktop app and use the web app.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, I'm assuming then you guys have the similar, you've heard similar for that one, for Outlook and MFA and the desktop app?
Yes, the Outlook with also enabled with the MFA with modern factor of authentications, because it will otherwise user cannot be configure their Outlook and all the stuff.
Yeah, basically I have to leave MFA as enabled instead of enforced. Is how I get around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everyone need to set up the app password, and this will create a lot of issues for the users, like the non-technical users.
Yeah,
They will
yeah.
create a
All
lot
right.
of noise.
So that's a limitation, Jeremy, and I think that should be in the report.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, what you guys are saying is correct, and I think I would just mark a note. Look, you know, from an MFA perspective, there is a limitation, you know, enforcement of MFA for Outlook, and these are the issues. But at some point, we're going to have to mitigate that, or Microsoft is, and then we'll take advantage of it. But that's what it sounds like. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
But I think it's getting. I mean, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and we kind of related, did we mention SSO, further below as part of the MFA? Because that's one of the things I've been looking into is using the Microsoft SSO, for going forward at some point in time. Because I read some articles on it that's much improved, and they implemented it pretty much everywhere, within Azure recently, so. I can
Yes,
force,
we can create the enterprise app for SSO. Like its integrations are much better than no with the Azure side. For apps, for SSO, even we can use B2B, business to business authentication for this.
okay, yeah, because, yeah, I noticed it's improved greatly over the last 6 months, so that's something I want to look into, start leveraging. That way, because my users are trying to remember 400 different passwords for 400 different apps. I'd rather have just force everybody to use SSO, and we have a little better control security wise.
Now, Jeremy, what do you need from me though on that? Is there anything specifically you need?
What is that? Well, that's something I would like, yes. Just how to, the best options for SSO, the B2B,
For Azure.
for Azure, for all our apps.
All right, well,
Or company wide, leverage an O365/Azure to as our company single sign on for all our applications and all our vendors.
so if we could put some recommendation there to solve these issues, that would be great. From a final recommendation perspective, even if it's high level enough to, obviously steer the company in the right direction. Don't have to be crazy detailed, but enough that it'll make sense. Okay.
Sure, and I think Azure Outlook again, MFA is getting quite intelligent as well. Because they're building increasingly AI. AI behind behind all these Active Directory and these authentication services, MFA services, and now even when you move around, because like even when I travel and I'm from one country to another country, the Outlook, as soon as I'm within IP of another country, the Outlook forces me to re-authenticate, to to provide my MFA again, because it feels my IP is changed, and I'm trying to connect to Outlook. So all those goodies are now coming, and they will keep improving with time. So yeah.
Absolutely, but I think Jeremy, your points, obviously makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's good. Cool.
Okay, going
Yeah,
forward.
actually, for as part of that, the SSO value, kind of evaluation, password storage systems, are like you got the Outlook, remember my password stuff. I kind of want to. The reason why I want to go to SSO is to kind of eliminate the need for that. But is there any recommendations of what should be used or not be used? And that's kind of the reason why I was pushing SSO as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, ideally, if you can like Tariq said, B2B as you're ready. If you let the authentication provider take care of the passwords, then it's their problem, and it's something that they have very strict security controls over. So again, the best scenario is that you let Azure Active Directory take care of the passwords, and even for the users B2B, or the whole password management is with them, and you enable self password reset as well, where customers or users can just come in and change their passwords themselves without consuming your support resources. But Tariq, do you have any thoughts around this?
Yes, because the thing is they are using multiple SSOs on their application, which we checked, and for this I would recommend to go with the With the B2B, like the business can use their own identity and go to authenticate and come to there with the SSO, and then obviously we can enable the application level conditional access for the application to enable the MFA for the mission critical and sensitive applications.
Yeah, and
Okay.
password, I think, also to clarify, I think Jeremy's asking also about password managers at an end user level. If you guys have experience with that, or if your recommendation is to just do password storage at the vendor level, that's fine too. But it's
Oh,
really,
okay, got it. You are saying for the credential managers, like which is storing the password on the device level, right?
Correct. Yeah, like like Chrome does, Firefox does, all that stuff.
Yeah, we can manage with some kind of policies. It cannot be stored.
Yeah, and basically, yeah, just the best practice recommendation. If there is a password manager, preferably that should be used besides the standard ones built in the browsers. What are the recommendations for that? If using one at all, yeah.
yeah,
Just look
you might have a stance on that for security or other reasons. That's fine. But if you have detail around that, that would be good. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so moving on to the next point. This is about, I think we touched upon this during so it was the naming conventions, and it was good to see that Jeremy, you started enforcing and following the naming conventions. But I think there is a need to take it to the next level and enforce it through policy, and you can do that at your Azure subscription level, resource group level, and nowadays you can have like there's a whole concept of management groups and landing zones, and so now we have various levels within Azure. But the whole idea is to have, again, within the contract logics infrastructure landscape in Azure, you have a whole kind of like a standards area where anybody who joins your team, anybody who leaves the team, needs to make sure that they follow certain standards. And naming conventions is important one to start with, and you can start creating the policies to enforce this.
Okay, it's pretty straightforward.
You need any hows or any other details?
No, I've seen them and played with them a little bit already since our last conversation, to be honest.
Okay.
Perfect. The next one is the backup and disaster recovery. So we touched upon this. So Tariq, do you want to cover this point, please?
Okay. Regard to the backups, we will create the policies and all the stuff. Backup policies and retention for the backups if there is already in place. Otherwise, we need to provide them the best practices for a data retention, data policies, and how much frequencies of the data. And regard to the DR, I think we already covered on the Gen 1 with the same model. I think that the image is missing here, which need to put here. Like we will deploy the full site recovery model here.
Yeah, this is where we need assistance with how to complete it as a complete redundancy on top of the DR.
And I think, Jeremy, the other thing is, well, and this is part of the data redundancy maybe down below too, but
yeah,
we've got to make sure that
it's not
everything
just
replicates right, persistency, anything that needs to be in place is right. So any house and technical aspects of it will be critical. This is likely something we'll just pull you in and have, obviously we'll work as a team solve this issue, but we do need to, not only for backup reasons, but for DR reasons, and then later on in the data redundancy side, we're going to have to, make sure that all of this is rock solid and automatic failovers and all that sort of good stuff. So detail is going to be critical in these areas.
Yeah, and it's more, and I think we've been concentrated more on the very high level in the past. I think I personally concentrate more on the databases than I do on anything, because everything else is easy to redeploy if we needed to. So I've been more concentrated on, but we got the blob storages and some of the other resources that I know probably are not being backed up in disaster recovery correctly. And I'm doing an actual DR test the next week or two, and I'll end up finding some gaps in there, I'm sure, secondary services that I know are not redundant for disaster recovery.
So for this one, I would think, I was thinking about this one, and again, in relation to data redundancy, maybe you guys are going to cover this, but the reality is, when we look at recommendations, we have US East, and we want to have it be fully redundant. What do we do? How do we do that? What does it look like? What's the high level diagram, that you guys would implement if we said for you guys to go do it? What does that look like? And at a high level, how is that accomplished? I think that's kind of the detail here, because this is super high level. Hey, this is a problem. Now we need to get to the actual recommendation, obviously. So that's good. Obviously, this is critical feedback.
Okay, sure. And regard to the subscription model, I think we need to consider the development subscription and production server subscription, which will cover your cost factor. It will reduce your cost as well, because the same subscription used for the both, it will not recommendable nowadays.
It won't what?
Like your development, if you are going to use for the development, you need to use the development subscription, and for your production environment, you need to use the production subscription.
So this way it'll reduce the cost on those sides, correct?
Yeah, yes.
And right now, because we're using everything under one subscription, we're probably paying more on a dev side versus a prod side.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
then
actually, our numbers are showing that actually.
now on the subscription model, any cost optimization recommendations, drawings, thoughts, I think that's important. We do need to reduce costs of that, and I think that when you're kind of just trying to make sure it's out there and somewhat correct, what happens is cost is usually the problem, and our cost is not scaling right. So know what that looks like and what your detailed recommendations are. Again, this is another one that likely we probably have you guys implement with us to ensure that it's right on, and it all goes accordingly, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, correct. And I also like to see kind of a high level what the process would be to take what's currently in the current subscription and move it to the dev subscription. Do we have to rebuild it, which I'm still okay with, or can we move it? It might be a mix or just one way or the other, but
I'm thinking we could probably remove a lot of costs.
correct. I think there's a lot of stuff in there, and between that and putting policies in place where developers can't just create things on the fly on their own.
Yeah,
will help.
What are you going to say now? Sorry for cutting you off.
No, that's fine actually. So you can move resources across subscriptions. I mean, it used to be again a challenge previously, but now you can. So example is, let's say you have a database server which has let's say three databases. I'm talking about PaaS, the database server with 3 databases. You can not only move it across resource groups once it's created in one place, you can now move it across subscriptions. So you can say, I want to move my whole database server with all the databases into another subscription. So you can do that straight from the portal itself.
Okay.
So once you have it created, you can move things around.
And that's why it's key to keep things in their own resource group, correct? Because you can turn around and remove the entire resource group if needed.
Absolutely, and like dev, test, and all these different environments. For example, there isn't so you can tear down the entire resource group and then recreate it, or you can move them around. And then again, so resource group is like a grouping of a whole, one logical grouping and typically an application goes into within the same resource group. So yeah, you can that's how you can move them around, or you can delete them, recreate them, and even script them. Infrastructure as a code point of view. Once you have, let's say, you create a database, you create a website, and maybe a storage account in a resource group, you can click with one click, it will export you the whole template of the whole thing, and then you can just delete it and recreate it using that template.
Gotcha.
Great.
Cool. So Tariq, moving on to the data security elements.
Yeah, regarding the data security, we need to check the security, go for the security hardening practice, like opening all open ports, all the stuff, like we need to bind with the specific traffic routing. Like if application A need to access application B, it's only allow for this. It's not open for all. Like when we are checking the last time, it looked like most of the stuff are open, and which need to go for the security hardening, and where we need to deploy the encryption. We can enable the disk level encryption, and if there is a storage account which are publicly accessible, we need to bound them with the private endpoint rather than to the public endpoints.
Sure. So Tariq, you mentioned VM level disk encryption here, and you mentioned SQL Server Elastic Pool encryption. So you mentioned two different encryptions here.
Yeah.
So, Jeremy, in this one, when we talked about this, you ran into some issues with some of this, correct?
Correct. So I actually did a test with the VM level encryption today, so I gotta wait till tomorrow to see if it resolves on the vulnerability scans. For that, when it comes down to the firewall and locking down the to private network, I tested that as well in the same test. But when I do it in our real environment that's end users actually hit, that's where I run into problems. So I don't know if it's because the application is trying to validate that they can connect to all the resources or something. But when I lock down the network, the firewall and individual components, or into a private network, that's when I start running into problems.
Okay. Regarding the data redundancy, I think we will cover with this SR site recovery management. Everything will be replicated to another region, and for the access layer, we use the traffic manager to control the services and access without any interruption.
So when you do the recommendations, what level of information do you give on this? Do you detail it?
Yes, we will provide details, and we will try to provide some sort of the visual diagram to present the things.
Cool, awesome. Jeremy?
Yeah, that's what I had the same question. So
yeah, that's good.
Okay. So we'll talk about quickly. I think we touched upon this CI/CD. briefly had some discussion, but this is a kind of notes around the same discussion. So I think we did look at some elements of improvements here, isn't it, Jeremy, about the way the variables are being used in things like connection strings into the release pipelines. Because again, once you start doing, I think this goes back to the segregation of subscription model into dev and test and dev and prod subscriptions. Similarly, with CI/CD, when the developers should be able to only see SQL Server strings and stuff like that for their environment, for dev environment and or test environments, but they should never be able to see the connection strings of a production environment, because then anybody can go into the machine management studio and try and connect to a production SQL Server. Which again would be limited by the security hardening we recommended earlier as a step 1 for Gen 2. But then again, things like passwords and should not be exposed through the CI/CD pipelines, and so that the recommended use of key vaults there.
Gotcha. Good.
There is a recommendation of, again, using unit testing. This is more of a development practice and stability recommendation as opposed to a security recommendation. Something to be communicated to the dev teams, further down. At the moment, the infrastructure is not scripted, or I shouldn't say scripted. It's not. You can't create a full environment through a script, which is something that you should consider. Again, with Azure, it's easy to reverse engineer this, where you can have an environment and then generate a script and then keep it within a Git repository or within one of your own source control repository that you already have. Just in case, again, when disaster happens or accidentally some stuff gets deleted, because this is not, with Azure and cloud as we understand, right? It's not the same as the on-premise environment. It wasn't easier for somebody to go and just rub a VM, right? VM was physical and machines were physical, stuff was there physically deployed. Whereas in Azure, somebody can go and press a delete button on the resource group and it's gone. Basically, it's non-recoverable. So for such kind of things, although you can do things, you can add logs, you can add policies if people can't delete things. But the whole idea of having a infrastructure as a code is that you should be able to recreate your environment, on demand. So and you should start that as a DevOps practice, within the company.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
This is the same thing. I think we have kind of covered these points here that I mentioned around CI/CD. Again, in terms of if you need help from from us to help you set this up, or recommendations or something like that. I mean, we can engage with you to do something like this. The other element I would say is from Azure to do. Obviously, we haven't done a detailed security assessment of each of your deployed resources, but because there is an exercise we do for other customers, which is where we actually get access to your environment. You give us a read-only access to your Azure subscription. We go in, we look at each of your deployed services, and then we provide recommendations on what should be, what's missing. But that's kind of a bit more next level detail exercise of assessment. Something we can help you with if you need that.
I think at a first glance, though, a lot of the stuff high level are the critical items. We should be addressing a lot of these points, and then getting into the finer details as we reconfigure and configure. I do think some of these things, Jeremy, correct me where I'm wrong, but we would want to probably do some engagement with, free up time and resource from your perspective, but also just to do it right from the best practices perspective. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, that was my thoughts exactly. I mean, we kind of need to know the high level what the effort is and the guidelines at a high level. That way we can make some of those business decisions to move some of the stuff forward and prioritize it right as well.
And I think when you guys, because my assumption is, so we have this call like typically from an assessment perspective, and then you guys kind of document and detail stuff out, and we get like a final kind of set of recommendations, right? That's kind of the typical.
That's correct, yes.
And then this is the discussion, but it gets more detailed as per our discussion in the final report. But when we do the recommendations, obviously, I think the next step from there is we almost want to prioritize them from, and a lot of them are critical, so I don't know how you'd prioritize them. But if there's things in your eyes that are, absolutely critical compared to highs, mediums, lows, or whatever, that would help us say, okay, guys, we want to engage with you to do, these 3 projects in Q1, right? Because I think inevitably we're going to want to you for that stuff. And, I think for the time and whatnot in this initial assessment, I mean, this is, as I explained to Cassandra, only the start of the long term. We want to, ensure that these ideas and recommendations are not just implemented across yours and our team, but they're done right. And I do want some oversight on that to ensure that it's, obviously the best it can be. And one of the topics, just FYI, I didn't see in here was scale up versus scale out. We talked about scaling a bit. A lot of that is, well, sometimes a cost optimization exercise too. And I'm curious in those thoughts. I don't know what you need to get to where scale out versus scale up, there's like a recommendation from you. But I think that's critical because our costs are very much, well, they're high from my perspective, and I would want to, use your expertise to minimize cost. The other thing is, we leverage, as an example, Microsoft's cognitive search for OCR and for indexing, and those costs are expensive. Are there other things that we might leverage in your experience that you think, are either better solutions or cost-effective solutions, or maybe the way we're leveraging Azure isn't right? But I would think from those models, those are all cost efficiencies, optimizations, and they're also scalability questions that I don't think we have. While we're using them and they work and they're pretty correct, I don't think it's, optimized by any means. Jeremy, do you agree with that sentiment?
Yes, I do. Because that's where that's where our biggest cost is right now.
And a lot of that's because obviously we store a lot of documents, like millions. So, when you go through that process, it gets expensive. But, we've tossed around the idea of Elasticsearch, all that sort of stuff. But if you guys have recommendations or ways to, sort of solve those issues, that would be great. And the other thing besides that, that we talked about during our discussions was centered around compliance and security and updates type of dashboards. And Jeremy had, noted to you guys that, hey, I update all these things, but there's a lot of red bars and it's continuous. So one of the recommendations I was hoping to see was around how we keep everything up to date and, critically correct from the security and compliance perspective without maybe having to manually do everything. I don't know if there's recommendations there or if it really just is a manual effort, but anything you guys can provide around that recommendation would be good for this first report, because ultimately we're going to take this report and figure out which ones we can tackle and which ones you can tackle, and we're going to work together to mitigate it, right? So that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. Also, is on on login, how the best way to leverage the log analytics as well.
I think we can, in this case, we can use either for with the Azure Arc or Azure Sentinel for logging in all the stuff. But we can verify internally and then we suggest in the next. Imran, is it okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We can
And
have a
then-
chat about that.
I have one other question. It's not related to this. Jeremy, you did an HSTS test on, I think it was the traffic manager like 3 weeks back, correct?
Correct.
And I guess with you know, lately that has been upped to be more of a high level vulnerability, HSTS.
For
I
PCI.
guess, what's that?
Only for PCI is where I run the same test with Qualys and with a normal Vorn scan. It comes out as a low. It's
Yeah,
on
so
PCI that I got elevated on.
Do you guys know, like from a strategy perspective, are there ways to resolve that at a pure IT network level versus code? Because I think what's going on is we present the 302 because we route based on some variables and whatnot when you hit our application. And so if you go to the login screen, but you have certain things enabled like SSO, or you have variables and, you know, sessions, it's going to automatically route to where you're supposed to be. But do you guys have experience with STS?
STS, I'm not exactly sure, Tariq.
Regard to STS,
HSTS, yeah. Is it
yeah,
the same?
HSTS, not much, but we have worked with the traffic managers regard to the traffic redirection from like the geographical traffic and these type of stuff. But I'm not familiar too much with this.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I just figured I'd ask. We have a couple of strategies that we can employ application level, but we haven't historically had to do it. And now the way we route could, I mean, it's not a huge ordeal. I just figured if you guys had experience, but no
So
big deal.
if it's flagging an exception from Azure, is this Azure Security Advisor that's flagging the exception? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, our
Well, we have a
vulnerabilities.
report,
Yeah.
security
When
metrics.
can you please share that in an email with us?
Yep, I can send you the report.
I think if you can share with us, maybe the thing which we are understanding is the same. But let's share with us, and then we can evaluate.
Cool. All right. So, I mean, obviously, I have a hard stop because I have a meeting at 3, but this was good. I think you guys got a lot of the major points there. So, you know, what's your thoughts on, you know, kind of the final report and recommendations and next steps here?
Yes, I think I've taken the notes again during this call here for both Gen 1, Gen 2, your feedback. So we'll try and incorporate this into the document. And I think then we'll give you a chance to have a look at it and just let us know what are your thoughts of the next version that we're going to submit. And then obviously, you know, it's all about you know, how we can help you with to achieve some of this. You know, if you need our help or any other guidance that you need from us, you know, it's you know,
Well,
we're open to discussions.
Yeah, we're gonna likely, you know, engage you to help us with a lot of this, but purely from a recommendations perspective, I want to make sure we get the details in written, you know, technically and detailed, and I get that final report. Are you thinking a week out, or when are you thinking that might be available?
So Tariq, do we have roughly an idea?
I think by end of next week.
Yeah, I think let's target 27th November for this.
All right, so
Yeah.
that's good. What we'll do is once we receive that report and it's detailed, you know, because I think the details are critical here. I want to make because what I do is, you know, from a technical perspective, we'll kind of iron out a plan. We'll stack rank it priority wise as well. And then what we'll do is we'll get back together and talk about how you versus our team can help. Because inevitably it's going to be both sides, right? Kind of tackling each of these to get this done, because we're not going to we don't want to leave this stuff hanging out there. These are good recommendations. So once you put the detail, I think it'll be very, very impactful for us to take the next steps and engage in the next, kind of round of what we need to do. So this is good.
Perfect.
Jeremy, anything you
I
can think of? I mean,
No, that pretty much covers it for me. I look forward to the report so we can start planning sessions and start knocking some of the stuff off the list.
absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Thanks for your time, guys. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and we'll look
Thank
for
you.
that report next week. Other than that, guys, have a great day, great week, and we'll touch base soon.
Cheers.
And
Thank you.
I'll send the reports out to you shortly on the email.
Yeah, sure. And also send us the penetration test report, which you guys are already done, so we can evaluate.
Yep, I'll send you a couple of histories of them for the G1 and G2 and the latest vulnerability scans as well.
Okay, sure.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you so much.